Welcome to the Mandela Podcast, where we help you feel your best body, mind, and soul. Well, welcome back, listeners. Charlie McDermott, co-host, producer of the show, here with Bree Jaworski. Bree, how you doing?
Charlie, I'm awesome. Today we're going to be talking about cognitive distortions, which sounds scary, but I promise you it's not.
Well, it's for me. I mean, obviously, it could sound scary, but it also sounds really important. I mean, it's, and we've talked about, you know, the importance of mood and I mean, if your head isn't on, however, you know, you define that, it impacts everything. So
Yeah.
this is it's going to be very interesting. So
I hope so.
Yeah.
So cognitive distortions are something that we talk about in CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about, there are lots and lots of them. I'm going to go over 10 today, 10 of like some of the most common ones. And also I want to let everybody know that everything we're talking about today, every single human being does some of these things some of the time. So I don't want you listening to this and being like, oh my gosh, I do all of those. You know, probably you do all of these things from time to time, but the time when it becomes invasive on your life, or like Charlie was just mentioning, like it starts to impact all different, you know, aspects of your life, is when you notice that you're doing these things a lot. And so what I would challenge anybody listening is just listen to what they are. At first, you're going to be like, oh, I do that. But then like really like sit with yourself and ask yourself, like, do you do this to the point where it's like becoming a problem in your life? Or is it just like a once in a while kind of thing? Because if it's a once in a while kind of thing, you're perfectly fine. You're perfectly normal. You know, if you find yourself doing these things a lot, then I'm going to give you some tips at the end on how to kind of get past this. Okay. So in CBT, we talk about what's called the cognitive triangle. And so all that means is if you think of a triangle, at the very top, at the very point at the top, we have your thoughts. And so basically your thoughts kind of dictate everything in regards to the cognitive triangle. So your thoughts impact your behaviors, which then impact your feelings. Okay. So the thought behind that is if we can change some of the way that we're thinking about things, change our thoughts, then we can change our behaviors and thus change the way that we feel about them. So all this is just picking out some of those things that are cognitive distortions, are basically like thinking errors. It's our brain playing tricks on us, making us most times thinking things are a lot worse or just not realistic. Like our brain sometimes does that. It plays tricks on us and makes us think that situations or, you know, things people say or don't say can be taken in more of a negative way than they really were ever intended to be in the first place. So that's all we're really trying to point out today. So we're going to go over the 10 most common cognitive distortions, and we'll see how many of these you do, Charlie. I'm not airing out my dirty laundry here, but we might ask you.
This is going to be fun.
Okay, so the first one. Yeah, it'll be harmless, I promise. Okay, so the first one is called all or nothing thinking. So this is when people see things, situations in very black and white terms. There's not a lot of nuance and there's not a lot of gray area. The other thing is when I'm reading these off and when you're thinking about them yourself, even if you don't do them yourself, you probably know somebody that does this, where you can be like, oh, Susie down the road, she always thinks in black and white, you know, that kind of thing. So, you know, let's try not to focus on them so much. We'll focus on ourselves, but black and white thinking. So we've all heard of this, you know, it's either this or this. Like, for example, if you're doing something and you fall short of the outcome that you wanted, that automatically means you're a failure. It doesn't mean that you did okay or you tried your best or like you accomplished something. It's like you didn't get exactly what you wanted. You fell short in some way, automatic failure. Another example of this would be like someone that's trying to, you know, watch their weight or like counting macros or something like that. If they have one day where they're just completely off track, then they've blown their diet completely. It's a waste of time. They might as well just throw in the towel and like go binge, because this one day has now thrown them totally off course, you know?
Yeah.
So that very like black and white thinking, it's either this or it's this. It's either I'm 100% perfect or I'm a failure.
Yep.
kind of thing.
Yep.
So, yeah, so that's the first one. So again, as I go through these, like you're probably like, yeah, I've done that before, but like, do you do this often? That's the issue. Okay. All right. So going on to number 2. Number 2 is called overgeneralization. So you take a single negative event and then you see that as a never-ending cycle of defeat. Okay. So like maybe one bad date, like you have one bad date, and then you're like, I will never find love. I'm not meant to be in love. I'm meant to be single my whole life, like just overgeneralizing a simple situation. So have you ever found yourself doing this, Charlie? The
You know,
overgeneralization?
fortunately, as I've gotten older, I've gotten a little wiser, hanging around
Yes.
folks like you but it's
I
seriously,
get credit for this. I
life
love that.
life is if we're not growing, right? And we're always learning, and we all have those highs and lows of life. And boy, I've had my times where I've been at the very bottom, and it's so easy to generalize and
Yes.
just go, oh, another atrocious day, and
Yes.
nothing ever goes right for me. And part of
Mhm.
that, I have to remind myself, what you put out there, you get, so if you
100%.
want more bad days, right? So
Yes.
and tell me what you think of this, and you probably do it, but at the end of every day, good, bad, plain vanilla, I always go to bed, and this typically puts me to sleep. Now, maybe that shows how boring my life is, but I rarely get the number 2 or
No.
3. But I always play back the 3 kind of top things, best things that happened to
I
me that
love
day.
that. I love
And
that, especially before bed. That's really powerful because your
yeah,
brain waves right before bed are really receptive to that. So you're really like putting that into your subconscious mind.
yeah,
I
yeah,
love that. That's a great idea.
yeah.
Yeah, so I totally agree with what you said too. I think that as we get older, probably a lot of these things start to kind of fade out on their own. We don't have to consciously think about them so much as to not do them. I think that we just get better at managing these kind of thoughts as we get older.
That's a good point. Yeah,
I always say it. I don't love aging, but I do love getting older because a
yeah,
lot of that stuff just comes with it, which is
yeah,
an amazing part of getting older. So I
yeah.
thank you for sharing that. I totally agree with that. And I love that tip. So everyone should be doing something like that before you go to bed. It's really, really good for your life. Like those, again, like 95% of your life is in your subconscious mind.
Right.
5% is in our conscious mind. So that's a really good way to end your day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, we think of our
I'm gonna
conscious
use
mind
that.
as everything, but it's
Yeah.
not.
How about
Okay. So number 3. So number 3 is called the mental filter. So we pick out one single negative detail and we dwell on that exclusively. So like, for example, when I post this video on YouTube later, if I get one bad comment, there might be 100
that?
positive comments, but that
Yes.
one negative comment on
Yes.
my video saying you're horrible, you suck, you shouldn't make podcasts, like you should just stop. And then I will think, oh, I'm horrible, I should not film anymore, we should
Yep.
shut this down. Instead of like focusing on the totality of all the comments, I'm zeroing in on that one negative comment, and then I just take it from there.
Yeah.
And that's where these spirals start happening, right? So where I'm like, they're right. I'm the worst. I should stop doing this. We just pick out that one. So the mental filter. So again, I think a lot of people, especially online, people can be really
Mm,
cruel. And I think that people say things online that they wouldn't necessarily say in person.
yeah.
So it's really easy to be like a mean, like bully in comment
Yeah.
sections and things like that.
Yeah.
And if you're a content creator, like that's something that you have to be careful of if you're susceptible to this way of thinking,
Yeah.
So just
Which,
something to keep in mind.
and first thing that comes to my mind, Bree, is the challenge kids have nowadays,
Oh,
teens, and
yeah.
because what you just shared, as we get older, we get ideally wiser, and we understand maybe where some of these comments are coming from, and to
Yes.
not take it to heart. But boy, kids that are going through that's
Yes.
that'll mess you
Absolutely.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's another one on this list that's going to go right into the point that you just
Oh,
made about,
okay.
taking things personally.
Yeah.
Yeah, so see, you know what's on this
This is
list without
good.
even me having to tell you. So intuitive.
That's because it's all happened to me, right?
Yeah, right. I know. I know. I have some like as a side note, I have some pretty young clients right now, and I've just taken on like some new clients, and they're in like the 17 to like 23-year-old range, and it's just so interesting because I'm in my late 30s, and even that amount of time I feel like I'm like, oh, I've been there. Like I've experienced that, and I'm just my heart, like I have a lot of empathy for them because they're doing and experiencing a lot of the same things that I did. It's just that I have the life experience at this point to like know that those things are toxic or not worth my time or not worth my energy or whatever, but they're kind of just like in this cycle of it. And I was there and I get that. So
Yeah.
it's just one of those things that you gain perspective as you get
Hmm.
older with things like that. But so on kind of on the flip side of that, we have brings me to number 4, which is discounting the positive. So I think that if you're in kind of a mental state that's more negative, it can also be easy for you to discount positive
Hmm.
things that happen. So like if you were to put out a video or do a presentation or something like that, and someone tells you you did a good job, your first thought would be like, well, but I didn't do good enough. Like I could have done better, So you're discounting the positive things that are said, or the discounting the positive things that you're experiencing, and putting like a negative spin on it.
Yeah.
And you could do this with anything. It's not like anybody is exempt from this way of thinking. Like this could happen to anyone at any point with anything. You could, but in the same token, you can also put a positive spin on it.
Yeah.
And I feel like I talk about that kind of stuff a lot, and like just being positive and like reframing things. And but your thoughts matter and your words matter, and the way that you see things matters. And so like sometimes I feel like a broken record with these kind of things, but it really does make a difference in your
Amen.
world when you
Yep.
start to like reframe things in a more positive way.
Hmm.
Okay, so the next one, number 5, jumping to conclusions. So this one has kind of like 2 subcategories. So we have the first subcategory, which is mind reading. So you see somebody in a public place or maybe in a classroom or something, and they may give you a funny look or like have a face, and you say, oh, that girl doesn't like me, or like they
Yes.
don't like me, or like you're basically like mind reading. You're trying
Yeah.
to read their mind. You have no other context other than like some little signal that you perceived in your mind as being negative, and now you've said, oh, they don't like me. And so
Yep.
again, I think that this happens a lot more when we're younger. I think part of it is we don't care as much when we get older. I think you don't care as much if you perceive
Yeah.
someone not to like you. You're just like, they don't like me,
Yeah.
whatever,
Move on.
But when you're younger, I think you care more about stuff like that. But and so the other subcategory of the jumping to conclusions is fortune telling. So you're like basically knowing the outcome of something without actually having any sort of idea. So like maybe I keep using like classroom examples, but like you go into the first day of class and you're like, this class is going to be hard. I'm going to fail this class. Like
Hmm.
you don't know that. That's fortune telling. You don't know how things are going to pan out. And that is a very like negative kind of way of thinking about it. Even if it seems difficult at first, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to fail. So
Yeah.
that could be put into context of anything that you're trying to do that you're not like 100% confident in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this leads me to number 6, which is what you were touching on before, Charlie.
Uh-huh.
So this one is the personalization. And you would not believe how many people, and not just young people with this one, all walks of life do this. They take things very, very personally. And I can't even
You've
tell you.
offended me.
Yes, yes, very personal. And other
Yeah.
people's actions, their words, their or lack thereof, everything they take to
Yeah.
heart. They kind of make things about them that aren't really about them. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had to have with clients where, like for instance, maybe their spouse is doing or saying something, and I've had to tell them like over and over, like, you don't have to take that personally though. Like you're choosing to take it personally, but it wasn't necessarily even meant that way. And like, that's a
Mm.
choice if you want to absorb that in a negative way and make it about you, but it doesn't even sound like it really was about you. Like, typically speaking, when we do that, it doesn't make us feel good. We're doing it in a way
Yeah.
that's negative. So, um, another example of this would be like you see a group of people talking and you just assume that they're talking negatively about you,
You.
something like that,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
they're probably not, probably has nothing to do with you at all. But when you make things about you that, you have no business making about you, like you hurt your own feelings, literally. And,
That's good. Yeah.
it's just one of those things. It's so unnecessary. Like you just don't need to do it. And so yeah, has that ever happened to you? Maybe in your younger years where you took things personally?
How can it not?
Yeah.
It's younger, older, it's still, and I think a lot depends upon, I can just call it the mood,
Mm-hmm.
probably someone could say the same exact thing. And if I'm feeling great and all that,
Yes.
it's you spin it around.
Yep.
So it's a positive, but
Mm-hmm.
the other side is, hey, if you're in that negative mood, you tend to interpret it negatively. And
Yeah.
it's almost like it's like there's this vacuum when you're in that mode, and your
Yes.
brain is looking for negative stuff to suck in to feed that cycle of negativity.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And on the flip side, it's almost like you have a shield when you
yeah,
are in like a more
yeah,
positive space, like you have a shield
yeah,
against that kind of
yeah,
stuff. So it really does behoove you to try to stay. I mean, I know it's not possible all the time, obviously. Like I'm a human being just like everybody else. I have things going on in my personal life. I have a business to run. Like, I have all sorts of things all the time, but
yeah,
like, you can choose certain ways of thinking. You can
yeah,
choose to focus on negative things. You can choose to focus on the negative stressful things, because even positive things bring a level of stress to them, and so it really is just has a lot to do with your mindset, and I cannot stress that enough. But yeah, you're right that I think that can happen to anybody
yeah,
at any
yeah.
point.
And that's the
Personal
beauty
emotion.
of what you do and what you're covering here and with your other episodes. I mean, becoming aware is step number one, right?
Mhm.
That, oh, I can control that. Or, yeah, I reacted, maybe I could have reacted better next time, right? And,
Mhm.
when you start to understand what's going on and how your brain is interpreting things,
Yeah,
you can begin to
absolutely.
turn that around. Yeah.
And again, you're just hitting on points that you don't even know you're hitting on, because
Oh,
that's
yeah.
something else I'm going to talk about later. But I swear, Charlie doesn't even know. I give him like a 2 sentence like topic of what I'm going to be talking
Well,
about today, and
I
then
just I am
he just
such a
knows.
believer in this.
Yeah.
And I love this topic. And again, I that's why I'm a big fan of what you do, and how you do it,
Thanks.
and sharing this information. So, well, that's cool. I can't wait to the next
Yeah.
we get to that.
He's jumping to conclusions, but in a good way. Yeah. No, but it's so true. And I think it's a better place to come from, like thinking that you have some control over this stuff, right? Like then you're just like a helpless victim to like your
Victim. Yeah.
circumstances. To know that you have some control over it, I think for me is helpful. And it helps me to like stay in that positive mind frame that
Yeah.
like I know that it makes a difference, and like I have a little bit of control over it, which is nice. Okay, so this is a big one. So number 7 is emotional reasoning. So your truth in your mind is based on how you feel, not facts. So
Hmm.
I'll give you some
Hmm.
examples of this. So
Yeah.
like the basis for this one would be like, I feel blank, so that means blank. So like I feel guilty, so I must be a bad person. So you can fill in the blanks with anything, but like basically whatever you're feeling in that moment like dictates what is like the truth,
Yeah.
the facts. It's not based on facts, it's based on how you feel. And so a lot of people lead with their emotions, I think, in general.
Yeah.
And so this one I think is a big one.
It's huge.
Especially when people get angry or like they're worked up or like maybe arguing with someone, like you can let your emotions kind of like
Yeah.
take the front seat, versus like logic and reasoning and things like that, critical thinking. And that's why it's good to like take a break if you need to, if you're like having some sort of heated discussion with someone, or like even I'll tell couples, like, if we're talking about it right here in this room and like we're telling each other that like maybe you just need a little break, like that way you can say it in the heat of an argument and it's not like, oh, you're trying to get away from me or you're abandoning me. It's like, no, we already talked about that this is something that I might say if things get a little bit much, because
Right.
sometimes like you really do lead with your emotions and you take things out of context because you're just in that thought or that frame of thinking that like if I feel this, it's real. People even, I mean, it sounds silly, but people do this in dreams. Like they'll have a dream, they wake up, they feel a certain way about the dream, and
Hmm.
then they'll think whatever that means is true. So like I'll have couples tell me like, "Oh, I had a dream that like he cheated on me in my dream and I woke up and I was feeling angry, upset, all the things." And then I was like mad. I'm mad at him now, even though that has
Right.
no basis in reality at all. And like they know that, but they're letting their emotions
Yeah.
lead. And so then they get in this fight with their spouse over or partner over nothing, literally nothing, because they've led with their emotions instead of like, taking a second and like reflecting on whether or not that's actually based in reality or facts.
Sounds like a great sitcom episode.
Yes, yeah, exactly. But it does really happen in real life. It happens a lot, actually. It's funny.
Oh, man.
When people tell, I mean, it's funny because I'm not involved, I'm just like, oh no. And I think it's funny to most people after the fact, but when you're like during,
Yeah.
especially the person that didn't have the dream is like, are you serious right now? Like, what is going on here? Um,
Uh,
okay, so this is a big one, and I'm gonna ask you about this one too,
all
Charlie.
right.
So this one is called, it's number 8 out of 10, and this one is called should statements. So we've all done this, I think. So you tell yourself something like, if I should have done this differently, or it's kind of like that shoulda, coulda, woulda kind of thing. It's in the past. And that's the thing that's really destructive about this one is because when you're saying I should have done something, you're referring to something that's already happened and transpired. There's nothing you can do to change it. So not only is it not helpful, but it can also be really damaging in regards to just like having a negative mindset. So like say an example of this would be say you had like a recital, like a musical recital,
Hmm.
and you finish it and you say, "Oh, I should have done better. I should have practiced more. I should have like run the music by someone before this. I should have like, I should have
Yeah.
changed the song I was playing or whatever." Like all these things that like it doesn't matter now because A, it's over, and B, like would that have changed the outcome? Like we don't know, maybe you would have had the same exact feeling or the same exact outcome. So like
Yeah.
would it be better and more beneficial for you to focus on the things that you did well? Because I'm sure there are plenty of those things too, rather than, oh, I should have done this. I could have done this better. We see this a lot also with like guilt in regards to people passing. So like, oh, I should have said
Oh,
this. I should have
right.
done this with them. I should have spent more time with them. I should have called them, and really that doesn't do anything good for you as a person who's grieving, and it obviously doesn't change the situation either. So how about this one, Charlie? Have you found yourself doing this one from time to time?
Oh my goodness gracious, yes.
Yes, right.
And yeah, you're right. It drives you crazy
Mhm.
and it can just consume you.
Yeah.
And I've had moments where it has. And what has been helpful for me has been just reminding myself that we're all on a journey
Mhm.
and that whether it was I could have studied more or practiced more or said something different,
Right.
I was meant to do it the way I did it so
Yep.
that I could learn.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
but I love your point about, hey, there's always something positive that
Yeah.
happened as well. So,
Yeah.
look at that part and go, hey, I did that. That was awesome. Where'd that come from?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's also why people like, if you have enough space and time away from like whatever the incident
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
usually people don't have a lot of regrets because when enough time has gone by, they can see that if they had done something differently or if gone a different path, maybe these amazing things that they now know have transpired since then, maybe those wouldn't have happened.
Yes.
and they have
Yeah.
like the ability to see that. But when you're in that moment,
Yeah.
it's hard because you just see the negative parts. But when you have a
Yeah.
little distance from it, you can see that like, no, you really shouldn't have done that differently, or
Yeah.
you know, all those things that you could have done differently may not have ended up in the same place that you are now, which could be absolutely amazing. So
That's yeah.
yeah. So that's a one that's a little bit more difficult, I think, in the moment. But if you let some time, really does help with a lot of these things,
Mm,
and just giving yourself that space and grace to like look back on things and reflect on, you
mm,
know, if should have, could have, would have done things better, you know, maybe some of the amazing things wouldn't have happened in the future that you don't know about yet. So keep that in mind.
yep. Love it.
All right. So number 9 is labeling. So this one is, think of it as like not giving the benefit of the doubt. So labeling is like an extreme form of all or nothing thinking. So um, instead of saying something like, I made a mistake, you think, I'm a loser. If you got a bad grade, I'm a failure. If someone's rude to you one time, even if historically they've never been rude to you again or before that,
Right.
they're a jerk. You know, like you're
Yeah.
just sticking a label on someone based on
Yeah.
one thing, or yourself based off of one thing. And so we know when we do this, you know, some of our younger listeners may not like this one as much because I feel like the younger generation like loves to put labels on things, like literally everything. But I think when you're doing it in the context that I'm referring to, like I think it can be really stigmatizing and negative. You know, like someone who goes to therapy, they're crazy, you know, like
Yeah.
that's not really helpful to anybody. So just trying to like refrain from like putting all these labels on people
Mhm.
all the time, especially when they're based off of one thing. Like you don't really know the person, you know, one fact about
Yeah.
them, and then you label them as something, you know. So I
Mm,
think another good example of this, and this has probably happened to everybody, is getting like cut off in traffic and you think like, oh, that person's a jerk, you know, where in reality you give the benefit of the doubt and say like,
yeah.
maybe they're in a hurry because their wife's in labor and they're headed to the hospital, or like,
Right.
you know, maybe they've just had like the worst day of their life and they're just not the best driver right now. And like, you know,
Mm,
like if you think of it in a like bigger picture kind of way, it's easier
yep.
to give people the benefit of the doubt rather than just like labeling them and writing them off, you know. So
Mhm.
we do that with ourselves and we do that with others. So again,
Mm,
I think everybody's done this at some point. It's just the fact of like trying not to make a habit out of it.
yeah.
All right. So the last one, and again, like this is not a fully comprehensive list. Like there are lots and lots and lots of these cognitive disorders, but like at the same time, these are like some main ones. So I thought that these would be like good ones to bring on. But so the last one that I'm going to talk about today is called personalization and blame. So this one, again, you're making things personal about something that somebody else did usually, when it's not personal at all. So like an example of this would be your child gets a bad report card and you say, I'm a bad parent.
Oh, yeah.
So like you really like
Yeah.
jump into conclusions, like making this whole thing and blaming yourself for something that somebody else did.
Uh-huh.
Um, Another one would be your partner cheating on you, and you're saying, "I should have been a better
Yeah.
partner
Yeah.
if I had done this, or if you know, it gets into that shoulda, coulda, woulda thing again too."
Yeah.
So that's like a 2 for 1. But like taking the blame on and making it about you instead of the actions of somebody else. And so I
Mhm.
think that one can be really, really damaging too. Um, so yeah, so that is kind of, those are the 10 we're going to talk
Yeah.
about, cognitive distortions, which are just again just thinking errors. And so if a person were to find themselves doing some of these things, what can they do? So I don't want to leave you hanging as far as what you can do if you find yourself doing any of these things, to the point where they're becoming like intrusive in your life.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think the first thing is just to become familiar with some of these things. Like if you don't know that it's a thing, then you don't know to look out for it. You don't know
Yeah.
when to pick it out and that kind of thing. So again, there's millions of these things, not millions, but there are a lot more than what I went over. But just knowing some of the bigger ones, more common ones, I think is the first step. Just get familiar with them. And then the second thing to do would be start to notice when you do them. and you'll notice when other people do them too, if you get really familiar with them. Like, that's why I, as a clinician, can sit across from someone, and when I am noticing that they're with their language or their stories they're telling me, like I'm noticing they're doing them, I'm going to bring up cognitive distortions and say, okay, we need to talk about cognitive distortions, because I know them well enough to know I can pick them out in another person. And it's not to become like an expert on cognitive distortions, but the thing about it is, if you get familiar enough with them, you can start to pick them out for yourself and noticing when you're doing them. And then the biggest takeaway for today is being able to reframe. So you can literally say to yourself, and I tell my clients this, like, oh, my brain's playing tricks on me again.
Yeah.
Or my brain's
That's
like,
good.
there's an error going on here in my brain. Like, that's fine. Let's just reframe it. And so again, if we go back to the beginning when I talked about the cognitive triangle, so our thoughts are at the top. So if you have a negative thought, which then impacts your behavior and then impacts the way that you feel, you'll notice if you just substitute out that negative thought with a positive thought, you'll then have a different behavior, and then you'll have a different feeling. So just to use that last example that I gave about the car situation, which we can all relate to. So if your original thought is, oh, that person's such a jerk, and then that makes your behavior makes you flip them the bird, and then your feeling afterwards is like agitation, frustration, all those things. So what happens when we substitute out that first thought? So instead of thinking that person's a jerk, maybe we think, maybe that person's having a rough day. Like, we don't know what's going on with their life. Like, let's just assume they're having a terrible day and they didn't actually mean to like cut me off or whatever. So then the behavior would be like, okay, I'm just going to keep driving. I'm not going to get worked up. And then the feeling would be like, you just let it go. Like, everything's fine. It wasn't personal. The feeling is like more peaceful, right? So all we did was switch out that one initial thought, and it's like a cascade of different things happened, and the ultimate end result is completely different. So and that's the way you feel. And so every human being is very consumed with the way they feel. Nobody wants to feel sad, angry, those low vibration emotions. We want to feel the high vibration emotions. So like, start with your thoughts. So like that reframing, if you notice you're doing some of these negative things, reframe the situation. You can find something in there that you can either take away from it, learn from it, or reframe it in a positive way. So I hope that was helpful to anyone listening.
Well, I'm going to use some of this right away.
Very good. Me too. I know. No, I really do. Like, I know about it, but I notice when I do it too. I'm not perfect. I do some of these still, but having the ability to reframe it really does make a difference in your relationships, in your situations, all the good things. So.
Yeah. Good stuff, Bree. So for listeners who maybe want to get in touch, want to learn more, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Definitely our website. So hit us up on our website. There's a tab on the website that's called Getting Started, and you can submit your information if you would like to request an appointment, for sure. And this is definitely something that this is real world therapy stuff that we're talking about in this episode today. This is stuff that we actually do in therapy at certain points. So yeah.
All right. So website is mandalacounseling.com with a hyphen in between. So it's MANDALA hyphen counseling, COUNSELING.com. And number is 239-360-1983. Bree, you enjoy the rest of your day there, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you. Thank you guys for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Mandala Podcast. To learn more about Mandala Counseling and Health Coaching, go to www.mandala-counseling.com. That's www.mandala-counseling, COUNSELING.com, or call 239-360-1983, or visit us on Facebook or Instagram.